the divine souls. In this speech on the significance of Radha Krishna Bhakti in Kaliyug, yesterday I was explaining to you that in order to decide on a path, you can look at 5 different criteria that the path should meet. Our goal by following a path is to attain God, and by attaining God we get perfect happiness and we get total release from sorrow. So, what path will take us to this divine goal? It would either have to be the path of karma, the path of gyan, or the path of bhakti. So you saw yesterday that neither the path of karma or gyan satisfy either of the first 2 criteria. The first one being anvay, the path should take you to your goal. And byatirek, which means without that path you cannot reach your goal. Because both karma and gyan on their own keep a person under maya. It is only when you do bhakti that you can go beyond maya, because you receive God's grace. Bhakti takes a soul all the way to God. And without bhakti, one cannot reach God. There are 3 more criteria that we have to examine and see if bhakti meets these criteria as well. The third being that bhakti must be independent, or the path, the correct path, must be independent. Tulsidas Ji says, Bhakti swatantra sakal sukha khani. Bhakti is totally independent. Tehi adhina jnana vijnana. Other paths like Gyan are dependent upon bhakti, but bhakti is not dependent upon anything. I explained previously that bhakti gives the results of all other paths. Yat karma bhir yat tapasa jnana vairagya tascha yat yogena dana dharmena shreyo bhiritarairapi. The Bhagavatam says that whatever results you can get by following any other path, you can get simply by doing bhakti. So bhakti doesn't have to be supplemented with any other path. In order to get rid of your panchakosh, the 5 material veils of Maya, you don't have to do yoga or follow the path of Gyan. Bhakti does that for you. In order to get Gyan and Vairagya, you don't have to follow any other path. Bhakti gives you those things automatically. In order to purify your heart, you don't have to do anything other than bhakti. Yoga is one other path that people say, well, aren't there 4 paths? Karma, Gyan, Yoga, and Bhakti. Yoga is also mentioned in our scriptures. Yoga, you can say it's a parallel path to Gyan, so it's included in that description of the path of Gyan. Yoga comes from, or is most famously promoted in the Patanjali Yoga Darshan. In that, sage Patanjali tells about yoga. He says, Atha yoganushasanam. Now I'm going to tell you about the strict practice of yoga. Yogaschitta vritti nirodha. Through the practice of yoga, you have to learn to control your mind. Control the fickleness of the mind. So on the path of yoga, there are also 8 steps. Yam and niyam are preliminary before you can even start to practice asana and pranayam. You have to discipline your life by following certain restrictions meaning certain things which are not allowed, and by doing certain things which are good for you. This is yam and niyam. Then the third stage, asana, practicing all the different postures, physical postures which have to be perfected. Asanas, mudras, cleaning techniques, different physical postures that help a person gain control over their emotions, develop health in their body, and ultimately get control over their mind. Pranayam is the fourth step. Pratyahar, the fifth step. Dhyan, the sixth step. See, meditation on the path of Gyan comes at a higher level. Dharana, the seventh step. And Samadhi, total absorption in the non-dual meditation of the path of yoga. So sage Patanjali says, Samadhi Siddhi Rishvara Pranidhanat. If you want to perfect your practice of Samadhi, you have to surrender to God. In other words, he is also saying you have to do bhakti. Shri Krishna says in the Gita, he describes the path of yoga and meditation on the path of yoga in gist. Sarvadvarani sanyamya manohridi nirudhya cha murdhnyadhayatmanah prana masthito yoga dharanam omityekaksharam brahma vyaharan mamanusmaran. What is one supposed to meditate on the path of yoga? He says, Shri Krishna says, me. The true yogi is the one who joins his mind with Bhagwan Shri Krishna. He says, you control your mind, control your senses, control your pran through the practice of yoga. You do all of that so that you can get into the position that you're ready to meditate. Now, how do you meditate? He says, think of me. Vyaharan mam anusmaran. Mam anusmaran. We have to think of Shri Krishna. Just like Patanjali said, Samadhi siddhi rishvara pranidhanat. Think of God if you want to perfect your samadhi. Although the way the yogi thinks of Shri Krishna is slightly different than the way the bhakt thinks of Shri Krishna, yet it is still important to surrender to Shri Krishna, even on the path of yoga. Sage Yagyavalkya says that true yoga is the joining of the soul with God. Sanyogo yoga ityukto jivatma paramatmano. What is yoga? Yoga means union or to join. So true yoga means jivatma joining with Paramatma. In the Bhagavatam, Shri Krishna tells Uddhav his definition of yoga. Etavan yoga adishto machishyai sanakadibhi sarvato mana akrishya mayyadha veshyate yatha. He says yoga is bringing your mind in from the world and attaching it to me. That's it. That's yoga. Yoga means joining our mind with God. So we see that the path of yoga is also empty without bhakti. It's dependent upon bhakti, just as jnana and karma are. But in fact, the path of yoga is a parallel path with the path of gyan, so they're generally considered as one. So we just say karma, gyan, and bhakti. We don't generally mention yoga separately. If the yogi doesn't practice bhakti, he can still develop siddhis. However, samadha vupasarga vyutthane siddhaya, those siddhis become an obstacle for the yogi on his path, because the true goal of yoga is to join with God, to become surrendered to God. What are these siddhis? They're mayic attractions, nothing else. Siddhis lie dormant in every human mind. Through the path of yoga, those siddhis are awakened as the yogi transcends to deeper and deeper levels of consciousness. But these are just landmarks. It shows the yogi that, okay, I've reached this level. They're not divine powers. In fact, if a yogi gets attached to one of his powers, showing it to others to impress them, or just enjoying using that power, then he loses that power. In other words, he goes backwards, because now he's off the path. The path of yoga is not about just gaining siddhis to use them. The path of yoga is about gaining control over your mind and surrendering that mind to Shri Krishna. One time, there was a very young saint, a true God-realized saint, who was walking in the jungles of Madhya Pradesh. He came upon the hut of a yogi. Now this yogi was a great yogi, but a yogi is not a God-realized saint. A yogi is a maya-baddh jeev who's practicing yoga and has reached some height and maybe has some siddhis. Now, when this young saint came upon this yogi's hut, he sat down outside, leaning back against the hut. The yogi was inside the hut at that time. When the yogi came outside, he saw this young boy, 16-year-old boy, leaning against his hut. So he felt a little insulted. "Who are you?" he said. The boy just had his eyes closed. Again he said, "Who are you?" The boy opened his eyes and said, "Your father." The yogi said, "What?" Now he was taking this as a challenge that, he's thinking, I'm a great yogi, the greatest yogi around here. Everyone respects me, and look how this boy is treating me. So he decided to use his powers to try to frighten the boy into respecting him. So using his power, he made like a wall of water coming through the jungle, like a tidal wave, you could say, coming through the jungle, smashing everything, coming right towards the hut. The boy just sat there. No reaction, no fear, didn't do anything, but that wall of water disappeared. The yogi tried something else. Using his power, he made dozens of wild beasts, lions and tigers, come running through the jungle, snarling, showing their teeth and their fangs, ready to jump on that boy. He again just smiled at the childishness of the yogi, and all of those beasts disappeared. Then that yogi made himself huge, like as tall as a mountain. He was so big that the hairs on his arms were like trees. So he was trying to frighten that boy, that true God-realized saint, with becoming so huge. The boy again did nothing. No response from him. Then the yogi just vanished. He disappeared. and he reappeared inside his hut. He went into samadhi and he contacted his master. A yogi, a true yogi, can do that. His master was somewhere else in Himalaya. And his master told him, "You're making a big mistake, my son. You know who that is out there? You go out there, fall at his feet, and surrender and beg forgiveness. He is my master as well, and he is your master." So the yogi came out, fell at this young, you can say boy, young man, he was 16 years old, fell at his feet and begged forgiveness. So then he said, "Now please tell me what to do." He became humble. So he was told that you should forget you have any siddhis whatsoever. Walk from here to Vrindavan and keep thinking of Shri Krishna. Totally forget you have any power. Just long for the vision of Shri Krishna. And when you get to Vrindavan, if you don't see Shri Krishna, don't enter. You wait and increase your longing until he comes to you. So that yogi did what he was told. He went and Shri Krishna was waiting for him there in Vrindavan, embraced him. So you see that yogi, even though he had such great powers, he didn't have humbleness, and he thought he was very high, but he hadn't attained anything divine. All of his powers were material. They were nothing in front of a true saint. And the true saint doesn't show his powers. But with the grace of that saint, he received the divine vision of Krishna, and he realized the true goal of yoga, which is to join in unison with God. And that goal can only be attained when you add bhakti. The name of that saint, by the way, is Kripaluji Maharaj. In his younger days, before he became Jagadguru, he spent several years in such a state, wandering around in remote areas and villages and jungles, absorbed in the highest state of divine ecstasy. So we learned of a few instances that happened in his time in the jungle. That was one of them, meeting this great yogi who was graced by him to get the divine vision of Shri Krishna. So we see that bhakti is totally independent. It doesn't have to be supplemented with any other practice. There are three kinds of bhakti: Sangha Siddha Bhakti, Aropa Siddha Bhakti, and Swarupa Siddha Bhakti. Sangha Siddha Bhakti is described by Shri Krishna in the Gita. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmara yudhya cha. Perform good karma and remember me all the time. So physically do all the karma, but remember God while you're performing the karma. Higher than that is Aropa Siddha Bhakti. This is also described in the Gita. Shri Krishna says, perform all those actions, but offer them to me. Yat karoshi, yadashnasi, yadjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. Whatever you do, offer it all to me. This is considered to be a higher level. However, both of those have this mishran. Karma is mixed in, or gyan is mixed in, or yoga is mixed in. Swarupa Siddha Bhakti is free from any affiliation of any other practice. This is considered to be the highest way of practicing bhakti. You just practice bhakti for the happiness of Shri Krishna. Tat sukha sukhitvam. But even in the Sangha Siddha Bhakti, where karma is mixed in, yet bhakti is prominent. Karma is secondary. If Gyan is mixed in, bhakti is prominent. Gyan is secondary. Same thing with Aropa Siddha Bhakti. The bhakti part is prominent. Karma and Gyan would be secondary. And in Swarupa Siddha Bhakti, there's only bhakti, no other practice of any kind. So bhakti is totally independent. Thus you see, only bhakti satisfies the third criterion of being independent of other practices, because it doesn't need to be supplemented. You can just do bhakti and do nothing else, and you will attain your divine goal. What about number 4, Sarvatrakita? Sarvatrakita means bhakti should be for everybody, or it means the true path should be for everybody, if it's the correct path. So we saw that karma and Gyan have very difficult rules to follow, impossible to follow in Kaliyug. To perform Vedic rituals and yagyas correctly, which is a requirement on the path of karma, is impossible in Kaliyug because the demands are too high, too strict. The path of Gyan is also impossible to follow in Kaliyug. It's difficult to follow in other yugas, impossible to follow in Kaliyug. Thus, no one can truly qualify for the path of karma or the path of Gyan in Kaliyug. But the path of bhakti, everyone is qualified. Bhakti is found everywhere. Think of it that way. Sarva Shastron mein bhakti. This is number 1. Bhakti is in all the scriptures. Alodya sarva shastrani vicharya cha punah punah idamekam sunishpannam dhyeyo narayano hari. Padma Puran. Vedavyasji says, I did manthan, alodya, sarva shastrani, the 6 darshan shastras, and all the scriptures. And what came to the top? Bhakti. Brahma says, Bhagavan brahmakartsnyena triranvikshya manishaya tadadhyavasyat kutastho ratiratmanyato bhavet. Bhagavatam. Brahma says, I did manthan, I churned all of our scriptures 3 times to see what was the nishkarsh that would come to the top. The most important thing, he says, ratiratman yato bhavet. Whatever develops bhakti, rati, for the soul of your soul, Shri Krishna, that is the most important thing. Sab karmat khagnayak eha kariya ram pad pankaj neha. All scriptures and all saints agree that the true goal, the true path, is to develop love, develop bhakti for the lotus feet of Shri Ram. So that's number 1. Bhakti is in all the scriptures and it is the essence of all the scriptures. Number 2, bhakti can be practiced by anyone, by everyone. Samasta kartaon se bhakti. For example, bhakti is for both a jnani and an agyani. Jnani means one with correct knowledge. So of course a jnani is going to practice bhakti. Like I explained to you previously, what is jnana? Jnana is the knowledge of who is God. Who are you? What will you get if you attain God? So if you understand God is Anand, and if you attain Him, you'll get unlimited bliss, of course you're going to do bhakti to Him. What else would you do? So the Jnani, of course, does bhakti to Shri Krishna. But even the Ajnani does bhakti to Shri Krishna. Kvema striyo vanacharir vyabhichar dushta Krishne kvachaish paramatmani rudha bhava Nanvishvaro nubhajato vidushopi sakshat Shreyastanotygadara jaivopayuktah. Bhagavat. Uddhav ji is saying, there were many gopis who didn't even understand the greatness of Shri Krishna. See, the Jnani understands, oh, Shri Krishna is Bhagavan. So, knowing the greatness of Shri Krishna, he surrenders to Him. He does bhakti to Him. But there were many gopis who didn't know. They didn't have Mahatmya Gyan. They didn't know even who is Shri Krishna. They didn't know He was God. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Yet they surrendered to Him. It didn't even matter that they didn't know who He was, because they surrendered their mind to Him, so they attained Him. You receive the outcome of whatever you attach your mind to. So even an Ajnani, even someone who doesn't have the knowledge of who Shri Krishna is, he can also do bhakti to Him. Someone who is mukt and someone who is baddh, both of them will do bhakti to Shri Krishna. The one who is baddh, of course, will do bhakti to Him. We're under Maya. How else will we get released from Maya? We have to do bhakti to Him. Mameva ye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. Gita. Only by surrendering to Shri Krishna can we get free from Maya. So a baddha jeev is going to do bhakti. But a mukta jeev, oh yes. Muktanam api siddhanam narayana parayana sudurlabha prashantatma kotishvapi mahamune. Even a mukta soul, one who is liberated from Maya, does bhakti to Shri Krishna in order to attain His divine love. Even after attaining the state of liberation, it is possible, although rare, for a liberated soul to come back out of that state of being absorbed in formless God, receive another birth on this earth planet, and then do bhakti to Shri Krishna. So, whether you are baddh or you are mukt, you can do bhakti. Whether you are sadhak or siddh, you can do bhakti. Kechit kevalaya bhaktya narayana parayana agham dhunvanti kartsnyena niharamira miva bhaskara. Bhagavat. Both the sadhak and the siddh. Sadhak means one who's aspiring for God, and siddh means one who's attained perfection. Both of them will do bhakti. If someone is asakt or someone is virakt, both will do bhakti. Asakt meaning attached in the world. If we're attached in the world, or virakt, you're not attached in the world. Although Bhagavatam says, Na nirvinno nati sakto bhakti yogosya siddhida. That the path of karma is for someone who is extremely attached in the world, and the path of jnana is for someone who is totally detached from the world, and the path of bhakti is for everybody who's in between, who are neither completely detached nor too attached. However, even someone who's completely attached can do bhakti, because it's simply a matter of desiring God. Keep your desires, just divert them towards God. And even someone who has no attachments does bhakti. Atma ramascha munayo nirgrantha apyurukrame kurvantyahaitu kim bhakti mitham bhuta guno hari. Bhagavat. Even an Atmaram Purnakam Paramahans like Shukdev ji, who has no desire, he is completely self-content. He doesn't need anything from outside to make him happy. Even he had a desire to do bhakti to Shri Krishna to experience Premanand. So even a total virakt person will do bhakti. Sadachari or Durachari. Sadachari means someone who follows dharma, a dharmatma. Of course, a Sadachari is going to do bhakti, but even a Durachari can do bhakti. Apichet Sudurachari. Sudurachari, Shri Krishna says in the Gita. Even an extremely fallen soul can do bhakti. Of course, a Sadachari is going to, but even a fallen soul can do bhakti. Vipradvishad gunayuta daravindanabha padaravinda vimukha chvapacham varishtham. Bhagavat. Bhakti punati mannishtha shvapakanapi sambhavat. Also from Bhagavat. It means even a totally fallen soul. How fallen? Sometimes our scriptures are very graphic in their descriptions in order to get the point across. How fallen? Even someone who lives by eating dog meat. Such a person, if he does bhakti, Chipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat chantim nigacchati kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He very quickly rises and becomes a good soul, a good person. Simply by doing bhakti, he can purify himself. Purushana punsak nari nar jiva charachar koya sarva bhav bhaj kapat taji mohi param priya soya. Bhagwan says, doesn't matter how fallen a soul is, if they start doing my bhakti, they become very dear to me. Much more dear to me than even the most respected Brahman, if that Brahman is bereft of bhakti. Bhagati hina biranchi kino hoi sab jiva hi mohi sam priya hoi bhagati vanta ati nichahu prani mohi prana priya asimam bani. Even Brahma is no more dear to God than any other soul if he is bereft of bhakti. But the most fallen soul is as dear to God as his own self, as his own life, if he has bhakti in his heart. Natatha me priyatam atmayo nirnashankarah nacha sankarshano nashrir Naivatma chayatha bhavan. Bhagavat. Shri Krishna says, the one who has bhakti for me is so dear to me that I consider him more dear than Brahma. He's more dear to me than my brother Balaram. He's more dear to me than Shri Lakshmi. He's more dear to me than my own Atma. Valmiki was such a fallen soul that he couldn't even pronounced two little syllables, Ra, Ma. He couldn't say the name Ram. Why? His heart was so polluted by all of his durachar. Yet, he was still able to do bhakti. He repeated Ram's name backwards, Mara, 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 Mara. And through that, he purified his heart and became a Mahapurush. So if Valmiki, whose heart was so impure that he couldn't even say God's name, was qualified to do bhakti, then it means everyone is qualified to do bhakti. So number one, bhakti is found in all the scriptures. Number two, everyone is qualified to do bhakti. Number three, there's no restriction of time. And number four, no restriction of place on doing bhakti. Na desha niyamastasmin, na kala niyamastatha. You can do bhakti anytime. In fact, you're supposed to do bhakti all the time. Smartavyo satatam vishnur vismartavyo na jatuchit. Padma Puran. The two main rules for bhakti are never forget God and always remember God. So it means bhakti can be done anytime, all the time, and any place. Because by remembering God, God won't become impure just because you're in an impure place. You shouldn't think, oh, I'm in the bathroom. I can't think of God in here. Nothing can make God impure. This is what's impure, and only by bringing God in can we purify it. So you're supposed to remember God all the time and in every place. So you see, there's no restrictions of bhakti, not on any person, not on any time, not on any place. Number five, sarva kamanaon se bhakti. You can do bhakti with any desire. Yad durlabham yadaprapyam manaso yanna gocharam tadapya prarthito dhyato dadati madhusudana. Garud Puran. By surrendering to God, you can get anything. Yad durlabham, that which is difficult to attain. Yadaprapyam, that which is impossible to obtain. Manaso yan nagocharam, that which your mind cannot even imagine, cannot even think to ask for, you can get from God, only through bhakti. So no matter what desire you have, you can turn that desire into bhakti if you surrender to God. Even if you have a worldly desire, if you surrender to God 100%, He'll fulfill that worldly desire. You want liberation? Surrender to Him. He'll fulfill that desire. But of course, the wise devotee doesn't ask for either of these things. He asks for something farther ahead, which we'll talk about in the days to come. But desire is not the enemy of bhakti. Desire can be turned into bhakti. You take whatever desires you have, and instead of desiring for the world, you desire for God. You want to see something beautiful, desire to see God's beauty. You want to have a friend to love you, desire to have God as your friend. So in this way, we can do bhakti with our desires. Samasta indriyon se bhakti. You can do bhakti with all of your senses. You can sing God's name. You can have darshan of a murti of God. You can listen to the leelas of God or the philosophy, the divine philosophy with your ears. In your meditation, you can imagine smelling the divine fragrance of Shri Krishna. So you can use all of your senses for doing bhakti. Use your feet to walk, do parikrama, visit holy places. Use your hands to do puja, arti. Use your eyes to do pat. So bhakti can be done with all of the senses. Number 7. Bhakti is done in all the yugas and in every ashram of life. Number 8 as well. All the yugas? Yes. Krite yadhyayato vishnum tretayam yajato makhai dvapare paricharyayam kalau tadhari kirtanat. Bhagavat. Tulsidas ji says the same thing. Krita yuga sab yogi vigyani kari hari dhyan tarahi bhav prani treta vividha yagya nar karahi prabhu hi samarpi. In Satyug, in Krityug, those people there, they did devotion to God simply by meditating upon Him. In Treta Yug, they did great yagyas, but those yagyas were also surrendered to Bhagwan. Dwapar kari Raghupati pad puja nar bhavatariya upayana duja. In Dwapar Yug, they did great puja to God and offered that to Him. And Kaliyug keval hari gun gaha gavat nar pavat bhavathaha. In Kaliyug we have to chant God's name, but in all 4 yugas bhakti was there. In all 4 ashrams bhakti is there, meaning brahmacharya, grihast, vanaprast, sannyas, the 4 stages of life. You see a brahmachari when he's doing his prayers, and also grihasthis when they do certain pujas, there's something that you're supposed to repeat. It's a Padma Puran shlok. Apavitra pavitro va sarvavasthapi yat Smaret Krishna Pundari Kaksham Sabahya Shucha. What does this shlok mean? That no matter whether you're impure on the outside, you're impure on the inside, no matter how impure you are, simply by remembering Shri Krishna, Yat Smaret Pundari Kaksham, by remembering the lotus-eyed one, Shri Krishna. Sabahyant. Bahya, outside, antah, inside, shuchi, you're purified. So you see, bhakti is there in every ritual because you repeat that shlok. So bhakti is there no matter what ashram of life you're in. It's there in all of our karma. Yat karoshi yadashnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. Gita. You can turn any karma into bhakti by offering it to God. So you see, there's no restriction on bhakti. No one can have an excuse that they can't do bhakti or they're not qualified for bhakti. So bhakti meets the 4th condition, which is sarvatrakita, whereas no other path can meet that condition. The final condition is sanatanatva, that the path, the true path, should be eternal. It should not take you, give you your outcome, and then the path itself finishes. It should last forever. So we'll see if the path of bhakti meets this final condition in my speech tomorrow. Boliye Vrindavan Bihari Lal Ki.